Nightclubs, once vibrant hubs of music and connection, are closing their doors. The reasons seem obvious: rising costs, shifting habits. But listen closer, and you'll hear a deeper story. Some blame men for the empty dance floors, claiming they've stopped showing up and crucially stopped paying. This complaint exposes an old unspoken deal: women as the draw, men as the spenders. For years this lopsided system was accepted, hidden in plain sight. Now men are quietly stepping back, questioning why they should bankroll a game where their only value is their wallet. The outrage from those who benefited reveals how fragile this arrangement always was. The empty clubs aren't just a business problem, they're a sign that the old social contract is being rewritten. The contradiction is glaring: calls for equality by day, demands for traditional perks by night. We champion equal pay and opportunity, yet expect men to foot the bill when the party starts. This double standard is a relic of the very patriarchy many claim to oppose. You can't demand equality and still expect princess treatment. Men are told to be both equals and providers, fueling confusion and resentment. The nightclub scene is just a microcosm: women as the prize, men as the paying customers. When men point out the hypocrisy, they're dismissed, not debated. True equality means consistency, not cherry-picking privileges. For decades, men were taught to pay for attention and validation, a silent, transactional dance. But now, the illusion is breaking. Men see the double standard and are quietly opting out. The collapse of this system isn't aggression, it's self-respect. When men stop playing, the business model fails and suddenly they're blamed for the fallout. But the truth is simple: the dance only worked because men paid for the music. Now equality means sharing the cost, not just the benefits. The era of unearned perks is ending. The mask is off. Men aren't walking away out of spite, they're choosing clarity over illusion. For generations, the social contract in clubs was clear but unspoken. Men pay, women attend. Men's value was their wallet, women's their presence. This wasn't questioned, it was tradition, reinforced by culture and media. Ladies' nights made it explicit. Female attendance was the commodity, men the customers. The system thrived on men equating self-worth with spending, women as passive prizes. But this fragile arrangement depended on both sides playing their roles. Now men are reading the fine print and rejecting a deal that offers little in return. Walking away isn't failure, it's a refusal to be seen as just a wallet. We hear the language of revolution and equality everywhere, until the bill arrives. Suddenly the demand for equality fades, replaced by expectations of traditional perks. This is the princess treatment, wanting modern rights with old privileges. It's not an oversight, it's a calculated bid for the best of both worlds. True equality isn't about reversing privilege, but ending it. Demanding special treatment by gender only reinforces the old system. When men call out the hypocrisy, they're not attacking equality. They're asking for it to be real. You can't fight for freedom while clinging to the comforts of the royal court. One of the most powerful tools used to justify this glaring double standard is the invocation of the patriarchy. The argument is simple and honestly pretty pervasive. Society is, and always has been, a system designed by men, for men. Therefore, any lingering privileges enjoyed by women, like not paying for dates or club entry, are just trivial crumbs from a table at which they were never allowed a seat. These are presented as insignificant perks that pale in comparison to the systemic power wielded by men. This narrative frames the demand for such privileges not as entitlement, but as a small, justified balancing of the scales. It's a clever rhetorical strategy that seeks to deflect any criticism of the double standard. The paradox, however, is that this argument requires one to hold two contradictory ideas at the same time. It means believing that the patriarchy is an oppressive force that must be dismantled, while at the same time demanding to cash the checks drawn from that very same system's bank account. It's wanting to burn down the institution while still collecting dividends from it. If the man pays model is a relic of a patriarchal past where men held all the economic power, then clinging to that model is an explicit act of endorsing a patriarchal dynamic. You simply can't logically condemn a system while actively benefiting from its customs and demanding their continuation. This intellectual inconsistency has been allowed to persist because it is emotionally compelling. It positions women as perpetual underdogs, even when they are in positions of advantage. It lets them occupy the moral high ground of the oppressed while enjoying the material benefits of the privileged. But men are starting to see through this paradox. They're questioning how a system can be simultaneously oppressive to women, yet structured in a way that financially obligates men to subsidize them. They see that the patriarchy has become a convenient scapegoat, a catch-all explanation used to absolve personal choices and justify unequal expectations. The truth is, the system was never exclusively beneficial to men. It assigned them rigid and often burdensome roles, with their worth and manhood contingent on their ability to provide and sacrifice. The expectation to pay was not a privilege, it was a prescribed duty, a performance of masculinity that came with immense pressure. By demanding that men continue to perform this duty while they themselves are freed from traditional female roles, modern discourse isn't fighting the patriarchy, it's actually attempting to create a new, more lopsided version of it, one that retains all the male obligations while erasing all the female ones. The final and maybe the most insidious twist in this whole game of disguised privilege is the reframing of equality as a form of attack. In this warped new logic, the act of asking a woman to accept equal responsibility is presented as an act of oppression. When a man suggests splitting a bill, he's not seen as promoting fairness. Instead, he's accused of being cheap, unchivalrous, or even hostile. When men collectively stop funding the nightlife of women, it's not seen as a logical response to a broken system. It gets framed as a misogynistic crisis. The baseline has been shifted so dramatically that anything less than a clear advantage for women is now labeled as a disadvantage. This is honestly a masterful inversion of reality. It's a trick where claiming victimhood becomes a source of power. The strategy is to pretend that the patriarchy still holds absolute power, making any request for female accountability look like an attempt to put women back in their place. This emotional blackmail is incredibly effective because it leverages societal guilt and the genuine desire of good men not to be seen as oppressors. It silences dissent by preemptively labeling it as hate. The narrative is controlled so tightly that men are placed in a no-win situation. Either they accept the double standard and pay, or they challenge it and are branded as part of the problem. But, men are no longer falling for this trick. They've become immune to the buzzwords and the guilt-tripping. They see with perfect clarity that this is not a fight for justice. It's a power grab wrapped in the language of social justice. They understand that when the withdrawal of a subsidy is called hate, it means the system was never fair to begin with. It was always based on extraction, and the oppressed were simply those who had grown accustomed to receiving benefits without contributing. The removal of that unearned privilege feels like an attack because their position was always artificially inflated. This is the ultimate social fraud, to have gained so much ground in the name of equality, only to use that power to demand the preservation of inequality. It's the costume of the victim worn by the victor. But the fraud has been detected. The men who are walking away are not filled with hate, they're filled with a profound and unshakable clarity. They see that the game was rigged, that the language was manipulated, and that their silence was used as fuel. The mask of equality has been ripped away, revealing the face of old privilege beneath. And for the men who see it, there is no going back to blindness. If you want to understand the modern dating and social landscape, you don't need a sociologist. You need an economist who understands rigged financial systems. The dynamic that has taken hold operates on a brutally simple yet devastatingly effective principle: privatize the gains and socialize the losses. In this model, one party reaps all the rewards when things go well, while the other is forced to absorb all the costs when things go wrong. It's a system designed not for partnership but for extraction, mirroring the most predatory practices of Wall Street banks. When a relationship is flourishing, it is framed as a testament to her value. I am empowered, I chose well, I deserve this happiness. The success is her personal victory, a direct result of her inherent worth and wise decisions. However, the moment the dynamic sours or the relationship ends, the narrative undergoes a radical and immediate transformation. The ledger is flipped. Suddenly the failure is no longer a shared outcome, but a singular indictment of him. You hurt me, you're toxic. You failed to provide the security I needed. The losses, be they emotional, social, or financial, are not split down the middle. Instead, they are entirely socialized, offloaded onto the man's shoulders. He is left to carry the full weight of the blame, the public shame, and often, the legal and financial consequences. This asymmetrical accounting is the hidden engine of the modern emotional economy, creating a system where men are incentivized to invest everything but are given no insurance against total ruin. This model is fundamentally unsustainable because it removes all risk for one party, thereby encouraging reckless emotional and social behavior. If you can enjoy all the upside of a venture with no exposure to the downside, why would you ever act with caution or consideration? This is the very definition of a moral hazard. A man enters a relationship assuming it's a joint venture, a partnership where risks and rewards are shared. He invests his time, his resources, his emotional vulnerability, and his protective instincts based on this assumption of good faith. He is, in essence, an investor who believes he is buying equity in a shared future. But he soon discovers that he was never a partner. He was the insurance policy. He was the backstop designed to absorb any and all negative outcomes. His investment does not grant him a share of the profits, only a guarantee that he will cover all the debts. This realization is a cold and brutal awakening. It's the moment a man understands that the system is not broken, but is in fact working exactly as it was designed, to transfer resources, energy, and accountability from him to her, all under the elegant disguise of love, romance, and progressive social norms. The game was never about shared success. It was always about his guaranteed failure. Welcome to the age of emotional capitalism, a system where the intangible qualities of human connection, love, compassion, admiration, and guilt have been weaponized and turned into currency. In this new economy, a woman's affection is not a gift freely given, it is capital to be invested, a tool to be wielded for maximum leverage. The relationship itself becomes a marketplace where a man's compliance and resources are traded for conditional approval and intimacy. This is not partnership, it is a sophisticated form of emotional commerce, and men are only now beginning to understand the predatory terms of the contracts they've been signing with their hearts. The transaction is often subtle at first, masked by the language of love and mutual support. A man is encouraged to be vulnerable, to open up, to share his deepest feelings, but he soon learns that this vulnerability is not met with unconditional acceptance. It is cataloged and stored, ready to be used as leverage against him in future conflicts. His confessions become ammunition, his weaknesses become pressure points. The compassion he has shown is not free. It is a line of credit that can be revoked at any moment, with the outstanding balance of his perceived flaws called in as payment. His desire for love and connection is used to ensure his obedience to an ever-shifting set of demands. This system mirrors the tactics of a shrewd capitalist, who identifies a need and then creates a monopoly on the solution. The need is a man's innate desire to love, protect, and build a life with a partner. The monopoly is created by a culture that tells him his masculinity is valid only when it serves female interests. He is taught that his worth is contingent on her happiness, so he must constantly strive to provide it. This turns her emotional state into a powerful tool of control. If she is happy, he is a good man. If she is unhappy, he is a failure, and he must work harder, give more, and sacrifice more to get back into her good graces. Men are waking up to this scam, not with a roar of anger but with the quiet click of a mind understanding a long-running deception. They are seeing love treated not as a sanctuary, but as a boardroom where negotiations are always tilted in the other party's favor. They are recognizing the pattern of emotional exploitation, where their natural desire for a loving partnership is used as the lever to extract their energy, their resources, and their very sense of self. This is why they are walking away. They are not rejecting love, they are rejecting the commodification of it. They are refusing to participate in an emotional economy where their hearts are treated as just another asset to be stripped. In any financial system, a loan requires collateral and asset the lender can seize if the borrower defaults. In the emotional economy, the most powerful form of collateral is male guilt. It is the bedrock upon which the entire system of control is built. From a young age, men are conditioned to feel responsibility for women's well-being. They are taught that female sadness, frustration, or discomfort is often a direct result of male failure. This conditioning makes them uniquely susceptible to guilt, which can then be used as currency to manipulate their behavior. This weaponized guilt operates like a silent, ever-present threat. If a man fails to meet expectations, sets a boundary, or prioritizes his own needs, he is made to feel he has committed a moral transgression. He is not just disappointing his partner, he is failing in his fundamental duty as a man. He is accused of being selfish, uncaring, or toxic. This charge is meant to trigger his conditioned guilt response, prompting him to capitulate and return to a state of service. His desire to be a good man is used against him, ensuring he remains locked in a cycle of apology and appeasement. The beauty of guilt as collateral is that it is infinitely renewable and requires no physical assets. It is an emotional debt created out of thin air. Any disagreement can be framed as his fault, any denied request portrayed as him being unsupportive. The goalposts are constantly moving, ensuring he is always in a state of slight default, always owing an emotional debt he must work to repay. This keeps the power dynamic permanently skewed in her favor. He is always the borrower, forever trying to prove his creditworthiness, while she is the lender, holding the power to declare him emotionally bankrupt at any moment. This is why men are becoming emotionally numb and withdrawn. It is a defense mechanism. When you realize any emotional investment will be used against you as collateral, you stop making investments. You learn that empathy is a liability and guilt is a trap. The only way to win is not to play. The quiet retreat of men is not a sign of their lack of feeling. It is a sign they are no longer willing to offer up their conscience as collateral. They have realized their peace of mind is more valuable than conditional approval bought with manufactured guilt. The modern dating scene often operates like a street corner dealer offering the first taste for free. The product being pushed is the intoxicating promise of love, admiration, and intimacy. The dealer, with a knowing smile, offers a sample, a taste of affection, a moment of connection, a glimpse of a beautiful future. This initial offering feels euphoric and real. It hooks the user, making him believe he has found something pure and life-altering. He is made to feel seen, desired, and valued. But this first hit is not a gift. It is a carefully calculated first step in securing a long-term, high-interest loan. Once the initial euphoria fades, the terms of the deal begin to reveal themselves. The love and validation that were once given freely now come with conditions. To get another taste, the man must start making payments. These payments are not monetary, at least not at first. They are payments of obedience, of silence, of sacrificed boundaries, and of prioritizing her needs above his own. He is told, implicitly or explicitly, if you want to keep feeling that love, you must do as I say. You must agree with me. You must put my comfort first. The relationship ceases to be a partnership and becomes a protection racket for his heart. Like any toxic loan, the interest rates are exorbitant and designed to create a cycle of perpetual debt. The more he gives, the more is demanded. The sacrifices he makes are never quite enough to pay off the principal. Instead, they are merely interest payments that keep the loan in good standing for another day. He finds himself running on a hamster wheel of performance, constantly striving to earn the affection that was once offered so easily. If he ever questions the arrangement or suggests the terms are unfair, he is met with the dealer's ultimate threat, the withdrawal of the product. The love is cut off and he is branded a bad man for failing to keep up with the payments. This is the breaking point for countless men. It's the moment of clarity when they realize they are not in a relationship, they are in debt. They see that the love they were promised was merely bait. The system was never designed to lead to a fulfilling partnership. It was designed to create dependence. The spell breaks when a man understands that walking away is not losing love, but escaping a predatory loan. He recognizes that true affection doesn't come with terms and conditions, and that genuine connection doesn't require him to mortgage his soul. He is not just rejecting a single person, he is rejecting the entire dealer model of emotional exploitation. At the heart of modern gender dynamics lies a breathtakingly effective strategy of manipulation, the grand inversion. This is the tactic by which the language of oppression is co-opted and transformed into a tool for dominance. While loudly proclaiming to be the victims of a deeply entrenched system, many have learned to skillfully wield the status of victimhood as a weapon, granting them a moral authority that shields their own actions from scrutiny. This inversion creates a landscape where accountability becomes a one-way street. A man is expected to be perpetually aware of his privilege, while a woman is granted a perpetual pass for her behavior, all justified under the banner of fighting historical injustice. It is a brilliant, if cynical, maneuver that flips reality on its head. This dynamic plays out in countless daily interactions. When he pays for the date, he is simply fulfilling an expected duty. When she chooses not to, it is an act of empowered self-interest. When he initiates a difficult conversation, he risks being labeled as aggressive or mansplaining. When she initiates the same conversation with blame and accusation, it is framed as her bravely speaking her truth to power. He is expected to fail with grace, absorbing the consequences of loss in silence, while her failures are seen as noble attempts, proof of her courage for even trying. This is not a partnership between equals. It is a carefully managed power imbalance where one side holds all the rhetorical and moral cards, ready to be played at a moment's notice. This strategy of inversion has been devastatingly successful because it exploits a fundamental decency in most men. Men are conditioned to be protectors and providers, and this instinct includes a desire to protect women from harm and injustice. The grand inversion weaponizes this very instinct against them. By constantly centering the narrative on female victimhood, it places men in a position where any act of self-advocacy, any pushback against unfairness, is framed as an act of aggression against the vulnerable. It traps them in a state of preemptive guilt, forcing them to absorb unfairness quietly, lest they be accused of perpetuating the very oppression they are told is their original sin. The end result is a system of selective accountability. It's an environment where one gender is encouraged to pursue its self-interest ruthlessly, while the other is shamed for even daring to define what its self-interest might be. The claim of being oppressed becomes the ultimate license to act without consequence, and the accusation of being an oppressor becomes the ultimate silencer. Men did not see this trap at first because it was so cleverly disguised in the language of justice, fairness, and progress. But the inversion was too extreme, the double standards too blatant, and slowly, the true nature of the game began to reveal itself, not as a quest for equality, but as a quiet coup for unchallenged power. In the arsenal of modern manipulation, no word is more powerful, more versatile, or more effective than patriarchy. It has been transformed from a specific sociological term into a magical incantation, a single word capable of ending any argument and silencing any dissent. It is the ultimate conversation stopper. The moment a man points out a clear double standard, questions a hypocritical stance, or simply presents a perspective rooted in his own experience, the word is deployed. He is not met with a counter-argument, he is met with a diagnosis. His viewpoint is not engaged with, it is dismissed as a symptom of his patriarchal conditioning, proof that he is part of the problem. This tactic is not designed to foster understanding or find common ground, it is designed to shut down the conversation entirely. By invoking patriarchy, the accuser instantly seizes the moral high ground, positioning herself as a brave truth-teller fighting a vast oppressive system. The man, in turn, is cast as a willing or unwitting agent of that same system. He is no longer an individual with a valid point of view. He is a walking embodiment of an ideology he is accused of upholding. This places him in an impossible rhetorical bind. To argue further is only to confirm his guilt. To defend himself is to prove he is exactly the defensive, fragile product of patriarchy she claims he is. The word has become a shield, a defensive mechanism used not to liberate the oppressed, but to protect toxic and manipulative behaviors from any form of criticism. It allows for the complete abdication of personal responsibility. A woman's poor choices, her inconsistencies, or her unfair treatment of others can all be excused and reframed. They are not her faults. They are the inevitable reactions of someone struggling to survive within an oppressive structure. The word patriarchy becomes a universal scapegoat, a boogeyman responsible for all negative outcomes, thus absolving the individual of any need for introspection or accountability for her own actions. For years, this tactic worked with chilling efficiency. Men, fearing the social and professional consequences of being labeled sexist or misogynistic, learned to fall silent. They swallowed their objections, ignored the blatant hypocrisy, and retreated from conversations where they knew they had no chance of being heard fairly. But the overuse of this weapon has dulled its blade. The word has been invoked so often, so reflexively, and for such trivial matters that it has begun to lose its power. Men have heard it one too many times. They have seen it used to justify the unjustifiable, and the fear it once induced has been replaced by a weary sense of recognition. They now see the word for what it is, not an argument but a tactic. The narrative of an all-encompassing patriarchy does more than just silence men. It creates a convenient and powerful boogeyman that can be blamed for every difficult or undesirable aspect of life. This allows for a massive offloading of personal responsibility onto an invisible, systemic force. A bad date is not the result of mismatched personalities or poor communication. It is a manifestation of patriarchal dating norms. Financial struggles are not the consequence of personal spending habits or career choices. They are the result of a capitalist patriarchy designed to keep women down. Even a lack of fulfillment in a relationship can be attributed not to the choices of the two people in it, but to the suffocating expectations imposed by a patriarchal society. This externalization of blame is psychologically comforting, but it is also, honestly, deeply disempowering in the long run. It prevents introspection and personal growth by attributing all of life's friction to an external enemy. Why work on your communication skills when the problem is mansplaining? Why manage your finances when the system is rigged? Why take responsibility for your own happiness when you can blame the patriarchy for your discontent? This mindset creates a state of perpetual victimhood, where the individual sees herself not as an active agent in her own life, but as a passive object being acted upon by forces beyond her control. It is a narrative that trades agency for absolution. For men, this constant blame shifting is maddening. They are presented as the human faces of this oppressive system, the foot soldiers of the patriarchy. His individual actions, intentions, and character are rendered irrelevant. He is no longer a person. He is a symbol. This transforms any personal disagreement or conflict into a political battle. A simple argument over chores is no longer about who left dishes in the sink. It is a microcosm of the gendered division of labor. He is not just arguing with his partner, he is arguing with the avatar of a centuries-old oppressive regime. This makes genuine connection and conflict resolution nearly impossible. The ultimate irony is that this boogeyman narrative, intended to empower women, often ends up infantilizing them. It suggests that they lack the agency to make their own choices, to be accountable for their own actions, or to shape their own destinies. It paints them as helpless figures, tossed about by the irresistible currents of systemic forces. Men have begun to see this contradiction clearly. They recognize that a truly empowered person takes responsibility for their life, their choices, and their happiness. The constant blaming of a shadowy system is no longer seen as a sophisticated critique of society, but as a convenient excuse for avoiding the difficult work of personal accountability. For a long time, the narrative of male privilege and female oppression was a powerful spell. It was repeated so often and with such conviction by academia, the media, and cultural institutions that it became a background truth for many. Men, conditioned to be empathetic and fair, largely accepted it. They listened, they tried to understand, and they felt the weight of the collective guilt they were told to carry. They accepted the premise that their experiences were secondary, their struggles invalid, and their perspective tainted by a privilege they were told they could not see. The spell held because it was woven with threads of genuine historical injustice, making it difficult to unpick the truths from the manipulations. But spells, especially those based on half-truths and emotional leverage, have a limited lifespan. Their power wanes with repetition. The narrative was applied too broadly, the accusations became too frequent, and the hypocrisy grew too obvious to ignore. Men heard they were privileged, yet saw family courts systematically remove them from their children's lives. They were told they were the powerful gender, yet watched as their mental health crises were mocked or ignored. They were accused of being oppressors while being expected to pay for everything, provide everything, and sacrifice everything, only to be discarded when their utility ran out. The gap between the narrative and their lived reality became a chasm. The breaking point was not a single event, but a slow, dawning realization born of relentless repetition. It was the 1,000th time hearing a double standard justified. It was the 100th time watching a man's life be destroyed by a false accusation with no consequences for the accuser. It was the 10th time being told to check his privilege after simply stating a fact. The constant, overwhelming barrage of blame did not break them, it inoculated them. The accusations lost their sting and became predictable noise. The spell was broken not by a counter-argument but by sheer exhaustion with the lie. The magic faded, and men began to see the game for what it was. This awakening was not born of hate, but of clarity. It was a quiet, internal switch flipping from maybe they're right to I know this is wrong. Men stopped engaging in the unwinnable arguments. They stopped trying to explain themselves to people who had already judged them. They simply stopped believing. They saw how their empathy had been used as a lever, their guilt as a currency, and their desire for fairness as a weapon against them. And once you see the mechanics of a magic trick, you can never be fooled by it again. In the final analysis of this fractured social landscape, the deepest wound inflicted upon men did not come from the piercing screams of radical activists or the biased pronouncements of a hostile media. It did not come from the overtly man-hating rhetoric or the systemic injustices baked into law. The most damaging blow, the one that shattered the last remnants of hope and trust, was delivered in silence. It was the profound, deafening silence of the good women, the mothers, sisters, daughters, friends, and partners, who saw the escalating unfairness and chose to say nothing. This silence was not a neutral act, It was a decision, and it was the loudest, most painful betrayal of all. Men never expected fairness from those who openly declared themselves to be their adversaries. You do not look for comfort in an enemy's camp. The true expectation, the quiet hope that persisted through all the noise, was that the women who claimed to love them, respect them, and see them as equals would eventually stand up and speak out. They waited for the women who said, "I'm not like that," to prove it. They looked for an ally, a voice of reason from within the ranks, someone who would have the courage to say, "This is wrong. This has gone too far. He is a good man and he doesn't deserve this." That voice never came. Instead, what men witnessed was a tacit approval, a quiet complicity. These women watched as their brothers were shamed, their fathers were mocked, and their sons were taught to be ashamed of their own nature. They listened to the casual misandry at brunch, nodded along with the anti-male sentiment in their social circles, and scrolled past the articles demonizing masculinity, all without a word of protest. Their silence was not passive. It was an active choice to preserve their own social standing, to avoid conflict, and to maintain their comfortable position within the group. In choosing their own comfort over the truth, they became enablers of the very system they claimed to disagree with. This quiet betrayal was more devastating than any overt attack because it came from the people men were conditioned to trust and protect. It was a knife twisted not by an enemy, but by a supposed friend. It dissolved the final layer of belief men had in the fundamental goodness and fairness of the other sex. The anger towards the activists was predictable, but the profound disappointment in the silent majority was soul-crushing. It was in that silence that men realized they were truly alone. The screams of the radicals were just noise, but the silence of the good women was a verdict. It was a judgment that confirmed their deepest fear, that when it truly mattered, no one would be there to defend them. The silence of the so-called good women was often cloaked in the guise of neutrality. They positioned themselves as non-combatants above the fray of the gender wars. "I'm not a feminist," they would say, as if this declaration absolved them of any responsibility. But this was a false neutrality, a convenient fiction. They may not have been on the front lines throwing the rhetorical punches, but they were standing in the back, quietly collecting the spoils of a war they claimed to have no part in. Theirs was the most comfortable position imaginable, enjoying all the benefits won by the aggressive activism of others, without having to bear any of the moral or social costs of that aggression. This dynamic created a perverse incentive structure. While radical feminists fought for and implemented systemic advantages, in divorce courts, in social narratives, and in legal protections, the moderate woman enjoyed these benefits as a matter of course. She benefited from the societal presumption of female innocence. She benefited from the legal systems that heavily favored mothers in custody battles. She benefited from the cultural shift that placed the burden of performance, both financially and emotionally, squarely on men. She did not have to march or shout. The system was being reshaped in her favor by others, and all she had to do was remain quiet and reap the rewards. This is why her silence was not neutrality. It was a strategic choice. To speak out against the double standards would have been to risk losing those unearned advantages. To defend a man being treated unfairly would have meant alienating herself from the dominant female social group. It would have required sacrificing her own comfort and privilege for a principle. It was far easier and far more profitable to simply play both sides. She could present a gentle, non-confrontational face to the men in her life while tacitly endorsing the system that extracted resources and respect from them. It was a perfect grift. Maintain plausible deniability while cashing the checks of a movement you publicly disavow. Men eventually saw through this performance. They realized that the good woman was not an ally in waiting. She was a silent shareholder in their dispossession. They saw that her claimed neutrality was a lie, a self-serving posture that allowed her to benefit from injustice while maintaining a clean conscience. The man who had hoped she would be his partner in creating a fair world realized she was merely a satisfied customer of the old, broken one. This realization was a profound betrayal because it revealed that her primary loyalty was not to fairness or to him, but to her own unearned advantage. Her silence wasn't peace, it was the quiet hum of a machine working perfectly in her favor. There came a point when men, surrounded by this wall of silence, began to speak out in frustration. They started to describe the patterns of behavior they were observing, the repeated instances of double standards and hypocrisy. They would say, "Why are women so silent about this? Why do they allow this to happen?" And it was at this precise moment that the good woman finally broke her silence. But she did not speak to validate his pain or to condemn the injustice. She spoke only to defend herself. The first words from her mouth were not, "You're right, let's fix this," but a sharp defensive retort, "Not all women are like that. Stop generalizing." This response was the final brutal knife twist. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, a tactic that brilliantly shifted the focus from her inaction to his supposed bigotry. The man, pointing out a legitimate and widespread pattern of complicity, was suddenly recast as the villain. He was the one at fault for generalizing, while she, the one who had remained silent in the face of countless specific injustices, was positioned as the victim of his unfair categorization. The conversation was no longer about the problem he was describing. It was about the problem she had with his description. It was a perfect deflection. And it worked for a very long time. The tragic irony is that this very defense, "Not all women are like that," became the ultimate proof of his point. If it were true that a significant number of women did not approve of the double standards, they would have been the first to condemn them. Their primary concern would have been the injustice itself, not the language used to describe it. A truly good person, upon hearing that a group they belong to is causing harm, does not rush to say, "Don't lump me in with them." They rush to say, "Let me help stop them." The defensive posture revealed their true priority, protecting their own image rather than protecting the men being harmed. This tactic broke something fundamental in the male psyche. It taught men that even the good ones would prioritize their own tribe over truth and justice. It showed that their pain was secondary to her comfort. The accusation of generalization was not a call for nuanced understanding, it was a command to shut up. It was a tool to silence the reporting of a pattern by attacking the observer. And as men saw this tactic deployed again and again, they realized their generalization wasn't a prejudice, it was an observation, confirmed by the very people who were condemning it. The shield of not all women was in fact a mirror reflecting a collective and undeniable complicity. For a man, the journey to this point is a slow and painful erosion of belief. He starts with an innate faith in fairness, in the idea that love and partnership are built on mutual respect and loyalty. He believes that if he is a good man, loving and sacrificial, the woman he chooses will be his staunchest ally, his defender in a harsh world. This faith is the bedrock of his willingness to commit, to build, and to protect. The silence of the good women, more than any other factor, is what systematically grinds this faith into dust. It's a death by 1,000 paper cuts, each cut a moment where an ally should have appeared, but never did. The final stage of this process is not anger or rage. Anger is an emotion reserved for those you still believe might change, a sign that you are still invested in the outcome. The final stage is far quieter and more permanent. It is the death of faith. It's the moment a man stops hoping. He no longer looks for a woman to speak up. He no longer expects fairness. He no longer believes that a defender will emerge from the crowd. He accepts with a profound and weary sadness that he is on his own. This is not a bitter conclusion, it is a logical one, arrived at after years of observation and unanswered calls for help. This loss of faith is irreversible. You cannot unsee the pattern of silent complicity. You cannot unhear the defensive cry of, "Not all women," when you were pleading for help. You cannot unlearn the lesson that your well-being was less important than her social comfort. A woman can apologize, she can change, she can even begin to speak out. But she cannot restore a man's faith once it has been extinguished. He may forgive her, he may even love her, but he will never again trust the world in the same way. He will forever build walls, keep a part of himself in reserve, and operate with the quiet understanding that his ultimate safety net is himself and himself alone. This is the true, unspoken catastrophe of the modern gender war. It is not the closed nightclubs or the empty dating apps. It is the silent death of faith in millions of men's hearts. It is the loss of the foundational belief in women as natural allies to men. The activists, in their quest for power, and the silent women, in their quest for comfort, have together managed to kill the one thing that made long-term, committed partnership feel safe for men. The belief that she would have his back. And without that faith, all that is left is a transactional marketplace, a landscape of lonely kings and queens, ruling over kingdoms of one. The final act of this long unfolding drama is not one of confrontation, but of quiet departure. It is the moment when men, individually and collectively, simply stop participating. This is not a coordinated strike or a planned protest organized in secret forums. It's a widespread, organic and silent phenomenon, a great refusal. Men are not fighting back, they're just walking away. They're letting go of the rope in the rigged game of tug-of-war they were always destined to lose. The tension that defined the system for so long doesn't resolve. It simply vanishes, because one side has dropped its end and walked off the field, leaving the other side to stumble backward into the dirt, holding a rope connected to nothing. This refusal is born not of malice or revenge but of profound and unshakable clarity. It's the wisdom that comes after absorbing 1,000 lessons in hypocrisy and betrayal. Men have realized that their participation was the fuel for their own destruction. Their effort, their money, their emotional labor, and their protective instincts were the very things being used to power a system that held them in contempt. To continue participating was to consent to their own disposability. The only logical, self-respecting move left was to withdraw that consent. This is not weakness, it's actually the ultimate act of self-preservation, a quiet declaration that the price of admission to the modern social game is simply too high. They are walking away from the nightclubs that treat them as walking wallets. They're walking away from the dating apps that have devolved into validation platforms for women and demoralizing meat grinders for men. They're walking away from the institution of marriage, which they increasingly see as a high-risk legal contract with devastating and unequal consequences for them in the event of failure. They're walking away from the expectation that they must sacrifice their mental and physical well-being on the altar of providing for others who offer little gratitude and even less loyalty in return. This is not a rejection of women, but a rejection of the toxic terms of engagement that have become the norm. The system was never designed to function without this constant, unacknowledged male effort. It stood on the backs of men who believed in duty, honor, and sacrifice. Now those men are waking up and realizing that their sense of duty was exploited, their honor was mocked, and their sacrifices were taken for granted. So they're choosing peace over performance, solitude over subjugation, and silence over the endless, unwinnable arguments. They're raising the white flag not in surrender to women, but in surrender to the reality that the game is rigged. And in walking away, they are triggering the collapse of the very system that pushed them out. A system built on extraction cannot survive when the resource being extracted is no longer available. The modern social economy was built on the assumption of a limitless supply of male energy, attention, and financial investment. Men were the engine, the power plant quietly humming in the background, keeping the lights on for the entire production. Their absence is not just a social problem, it's an economic catastrophe for the systems that depended on them. When men stop paying for overpriced drinks in clubs, the clubs go bankrupt. When men stop swiping and paying for premium features on dating apps, the apps' business models falter. When men refuse to take on massive mortgages for women who see them as disposable, the housing market feels the tremor. The shock waves of this withdrawal are being felt everywhere. Suddenly, the women who were told they were the prize, that they deserved the best without effort, are facing a marketplace with no buyers. The illusion of their high value was only sustained by a steady stream of male interest and investment. Without that investment, the illusion evaporates, leaving behind a cold and unforgiving reality. The simp economy, the vast multi-billion-dollar flow of resources from men to women in exchange for fleeting attention or conditional approval, is grinding to a halt. The party, it turns out, was never free. It was just paid for by someone else, and that someone else has now left the building. The ensuing panic is telling. The narrative immediately becomes one of blame. It's the men's fault for being bitter, for being incels, for not being man enough to handle the pressures of modern dating. The blame is placed squarely on them for their absence, yet never on the conditions that made their absence inevitable. The system is unable to engage in self-reflection. It cannot admit that its own toxic dynamics, its own relentless demands and double standards are the root cause of the collapse. It's just easier to vilify the men who left than to confront the uncomfortable truth that the entire structure was a parasitic one. This economic collapse is the direct and predictable consequence of a system that forgot a fundamental rule of nature. You cannot endlessly take from a source without replenishing it. Men were drained of their resources, their emotional resilience, and their trust, with nothing of substance offered in return. They were treated as a renewable resource, a crop to be harvested season after season, but they are not. They are individuals who have reached their breaking point. The engine has shut down not because it is faulty but because it has run out of fuel and no one ever thought to refill the tank. As men retreat into a quiet state of self-preservation, a strange and lonely echo begins to fill the void they have left behind. It's the sound of blame, of accusation, of demands that are now shouted into an empty canyon. Women who built their identities around the extraction of male resources now find themselves yelling at ghosts. Where have all the good men gone? They cry without understanding they are standing in the very graveyard they helped create. They blame men for their presence, and now they blame them for their absence. The man is a convenient scapegoat whether he is participating or not. This reaction is a testament to a profound lack of accountability. The narrative is always framed as a male failure. Men failed to live up to their expectations. Men are too fragile to handle empowered women. Men are selfish for prioritizing their own peace. The possibility that the expectations were unreasonable, that the empowerment was often just entitlement, or that a man's peace is a legitimate and worthy goal, is never considered. The fault must lie with him, because to admit otherwise would be to admit that the strategy so many women were taught to employ, leverage your youth and beauty for maximum gain, was a flawed, short-sighted and ultimately self-defeating one. The bitter irony is that the very girl power and female empowerment that was supposed to liberate women has, for many, led to a state of profound isolation. They were told they didn't need a man, and they believed it. Now they are being asked to prove it. Men have taken them at their word. You don't need us? Fine. Prove it. Your wish is coming true. And in the silence that follows, the weight of that independence becomes, for some, a crushing burden. The freedom they celebrated feels cold. The throne they fought for is a lonely seat. They have the power they demanded, but power over an empty kingdom is no power at all. And so the cries of blame continue, becoming more frantic as the silence deepens. They are terrorized by the true face of the world they helped build. A world without the unsolicited, unpaid, and unappreciated labor of men. They are at war with a phantom enemy, swinging at the air, because the men they are fighting are no longer on the battlefield. The men are at home, at peace, having realized that the only winning move was not to play. The echoes in the canyon are the last gasps of a dying paradigm, a final, futile attempt to blame the victim who finally had the courage to walk away. Perhaps the most tragic and misunderstood aspect of this entire collapse is the naive belief held by some that it can be reversed. They believe that if women just apologize, if they soften their stance, if they offer a truce, that men will simply come back, hearts open and ready to try again. This fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the wound. What has been broken is not a man's heart, which can mend, but his trust, which, once shattered on this scale, can never be fully restored. Men have not just walked away from a bad deal, they have walked away from the lie that a fair deal was ever possible. A man's trust, once given, is a powerful and sacred thing. He invests it in a partner, in a system, in a future. When he learns that this trust was systematically betrayed, not just by radical ideologues but by the silent complicity of the women he was supposed to be closest to, a permanent change occurs within him. He learns a lesson that cannot be unlearned. He has seen the mask slip, and the face behind it is now forever etched in his memory. Even if that face were to change, to soften with regret, he will never be able to forget what it once looked like. The innocence of his belief is gone, and it is not coming back. This is the point of no return. The forgiveness men may offer will be a distant, polite forgiveness. It will not be the warm, embracing forgiveness that allows for a return to vulnerability. The hurt is too deep, the patterns too clear, the betrayal too systemic. He will smile, he will be civil, but he will never again place his soul in the hands of a system or a collective that he knows used it as leverage against him. He will build his life on a new foundation, one made of his own strength, his own principles, and the loyalty of the few brothers who understand his journey. He is no longer looking for a queen to serve, he is building his own fortress. This is the endgame that no one saw coming. In their quest for power, control, and unearned privilege, they have lost the one thing they can never legislate, demand, or reclaim: the genuine, freely given trust of a good man. And without that trust, there can be no true partnership, no shared future, no civilization-building love. There can only be transactions, contracts, and a long, lonely peace. The men who walked away are not coming back, not in the way they were before. They have mourned the world they thought they were building. and they have learned, with finality, that you can never, ever go home again. We stand now in the quiet aftermath, surveying the wreckage of a social contract that has been shattered beyond recognition. The arguments have faded, the accusations have grown tiresome, and what remains is a landscape defined by a profound and pervasive silence. This silence is not peace, it is the sound of a world without trust. The most significant casualty in this long and bitter conflict was not the financial stability of nightclubs or the viability of dating apps. It was the fundamental bedrock belief that men and women were, at their core, allies in the grand project of life. That belief, once eroded, has left a chasm between the sexes that may take generations to bridge, if it can be bridged at all. This loss of trust is the unspoken fallout, the radioactive contamination that lingers long after the battles have ceased. A man who has been taught, through painful repetition, that his vulnerability will be weaponized, his sacrifices will be mocked, and his very nature will be pathologized, does not simply get over it. He adapts. He learns to operate in a world where emotional openness is a liability, and where partnership is a high-risk venture. The laughter that now greets female victimhood narratives is not the sound of cruelty, it is the sound of a deep, systemic disillusionment. It is the laughter of a man who has heard the same lie too many times and can no longer even feign belief. The consequences of this new reality are subtle but seismic. When men no longer trust, they no longer build. They stop investing in the long-term civilization-building projects that require absolute faith in a partner, marriage, family, shared legacies. Why would a man construct a castle with a queen who has already demonstrated that she sees him not as her king, but as the court jester and the royal treasury, to be discarded when the funds run dry? The refusal to engage is not a tantrum, it is a calculated risk assessment based on overwhelming evidence. The trust is gone, and with it, the willingness to be the foundation for someone else's ambitions. This is the irreversible outcome that the architects of this division never anticipated. They successfully won many battles, securing legal, social, and rhetorical advantages. They won the power to dictate the terms, to control the narrative, and to enforce their will. But in their victory, they lost the war for the male heart. They have gained a world where they can make demands, but they have lost the world where a man would give everything freely, out of love and devotion. They have everything they thought they wanted, except the one thing they truly needed, the unwavering, freely given trust of the men they pushed away. The grand irony of this era is that the pursuit of ultimate power and advantage has led not to a triumphant matriarchy, but to a vast and lonely kingdom of individuals. The woman who followed the script, who leveraged her youth, demanded princess treatment, and embraced a narrative of entitlement, now finds herself seated upon a throne, but the throne is in an empty room. She has the crown, the title, and the power she was told she deserved, but she reigns over a domain devoid of genuine partnership. The men she dismissed, mocked, or exploited are no longer clamoring for her attention at the foot of the throne, they have simply gone home. This loneliness is the unforeseen consequence of a strategy that prioritized individual gain over mutual connection. The empowerment that was sold was often a form of glorified narcissism, a philosophy that taught women to see relationships not as collaborative unions, but as vehicles for self-fulfillment, with men as the disposable chauffeurs. The problem with this model is that it has a definitive expiration date. When a woman's primary value proposition is her youth and beauty, she is building her entire life strategy on a depreciating asset. When that asset inevitably declines and she has no character, loyalty, or gratitude to offer in its place, she is left with nothing. And in a tragic mirroring of fates, the men who have walked away also face a form of solitude, yet their solitude is different. It is a solitude chosen, not imposed, a solitude of peace, not of desperation. It is the quiet calm of a man who has escaped a burning building. He may be alone, but he is safe. He has reclaimed his sovereignty, his peace of mind, and his resources. He finds fulfillment in his work, his hobbies, his friendships with other men who understand his journey. His loneliness is a fortress, protecting him from further harm, while her loneliness is a prison, a constant reminder of the connections she failed to build. Both genders now stand in their respective solitudes, a testament to the failure of the modern gender game. The promise of having it all turned out to be a cruel joke, leaving both men and women with less than they started with. The women who were promised a life of empowered ease find themselves grappling with an unexpected emptiness, while the men who were promised that their sacrifice would be rewarded have learned to find peace in self-reliance. The throne is lonely, whether it is a throne of bitter victory or one of quiet retreat. The game produced no winners, only different kinds of losers. If there is any hope to be found amidst these ruins, it does not lie in trying to glue the pieces of the old system back together. The old world is gone, and it is not coming back. Apologies will not work because the damage was systemic. Reversing the rhetoric will not work because the lessons have been learned. The only conceivable path forward, the only way to build something new and lasting from this wreckage, is to embrace the terrifying and liberating weight of true equality. This is an equality that is not a weapon for one side and a burden for the other, but a single, consistent standard applied to all. This true equality means shared responsibility and shared accountability. It means that if women want equal status in the workplace, they must accept equal financial responsibility in their personal lives. It means that if men are to be vulnerable and emotionally open, they must be met with genuine empathy, not with ammunition for future arguments. It demands that the legal system be blind to gender, treating fathers and mothers with the same respect and presumption of fitness. It means that a person's value is determined by their character, their integrity, and their contributions, not by their gender's historical grievances or privileges. This is a daunting prospect because it requires both genders to give up their most cherished shields. Women would have to relinquish the powerful tool of victimhood and the comfort of unearned privileges. They would have to accept the risks and responsibilities that come with true agency, understanding that their failures are their own, just as their successes are. Men, in turn, would have to relinquish the stoic, provider and protector role that, while burdensome, also conferred a sense of identity and purpose. They would have to learn to build partnerships based not on traditional roles but on negotiated, symmetrical respect. This path is not easy. It is far more difficult than the simple, comforting narratives of blame and entitlement that led us here. It requires courage, introspection, and a radical commitment to fairness, even when it is uncomfortable. It demands that we stop seeing each other as members of opposing teams and start seeing each other as individuals, to be judged on our own merits. The old game of gender politics, with its double standards and emotional blackmail, has led to a dead end of mutual distrust and isolation. The only way out is to stop playing the game altogether and start the hard work of building a world based on a principle we have long preached but rarely practiced. The final chapter of this story is not yet written. We are standing at a critical juncture in history, a moment of profound crisis that also holds the seeds of profound opportunity. The collapse of the old paradigm, while painful, has cleared the ground. The illusions have been burned away, the masks have been discarded, and for the first time in a long time, we are seeing things with a brutal, uncomfortable clarity. We have the chance to build something better in the place of what has fallen. A social contract based not on transactional roles and historical resentments, but on genuine, earned respect between sovereign individuals. This future will not be built by governments, by media campaigns, or by self-proclaimed leaders of gender movements. It will be built, or fail to be built, in the quiet interactions between individual men and women who choose to defy the toxic scripts they have been handed. It will be built by the woman who has the courage to call out a double standard among her friends. It will be built by the man who has the wisdom to offer trust to a woman who has proven, through her actions, that she is worthy of it. It is a future that will rise not from grand pronouncements, but from millions of small acts of integrity. For this to happen, both sides must mourn what they have lost. Women must mourn the end of the era of princess treatment and unearned advantage. Men must mourn the death of their belief in a world of chivalry and guaranteed appreciation. We must all accept that the innocence is gone. We cannot go back to the way things were. The path forward is through the wasteland, not around it. We must acknowledge the damage, understand its causes, and commit to not repeating the mistakes that led to this desolation. It requires a maturity that our culture has thus far failed to demonstrate. The choice is ours. We can continue to hurl blame across the canyon, our voices growing hoarse in an echo chamber of our own making, until we are left with nothing but our own bitter loneliness. Or, we can begin the slow, arduous work of building a new bridge, one founded on the unshakable pillars of mutual accountability, consistent principles, and the radical idea that the other gender is not a prize to be won or an enemy to be conquered, but a partner to be cherished. The game is over. The question that remains is whether we have the courage and the wisdom to create what comes next.